This is the DarshanTalks podcast, regulatory guy, irregular podcast with host Darshan Kulkarni. You can find the show on Twitter at DarshanTalks or the show's website at DarshanTalks.com.
Hey everyone, welcome to the DarshanTalks podcast. I'm your host Darshan Kulkarni. It's my mission to help patients trust the products they depend on. I'm an attorney, I'm a pharmacist, and I advise companies with FDA-regulated products. So if you have an interest in an FDA-regulated company or its products, this is the podcast for you. So today's podcast is about, how should we put this? It is about the change in the clinical trials world. We're going to be talking about everything from how does a newcomer in the industry take over the clinical research industry. We're going to talk about what are the new ways a company that is in clinical research can find and address the needs of patients or subjects. We're going to talk about decentralized clinical trials. I believe this is Decentralized Clinical Trials Week, actually, as we speak. So if you are in clinical research, if you're a sponsor, if you're at a site and you're trying to figure out how best to connect with individuals who might be able to help, who might be able to talk to you about some of these needs, this is the podcast you should be listening to. Today's guest is the CEO of Thread, which is a global CRO, which is actually in many ways changing the world. So I want to hear more about what changing the world looks like now. And ladies and gentlemen, our guest for today, John Reites. John, how are you?
John, thanks. Hey, thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm good. And I like the changing the world, just go, start talking. Yeah, no, it's a little more complicated than that, but I think we'll dig into that a little bit more today.
I'm excited to dig in. I'm a little concerned because the last guest I had on was talking a little bit about how I sometimes ask hard questions. You literally positioned yourself next to the door, so that concerns me a little bit.
Yeah, Darshan, for what it's worth, I had to, for the first time in a long time, I had to go out of town for a family thing. And this is what the inside of a hotel looks like. They do exist. Maybe you don't remember. It's been a while. They exist. Hotel. Yeah, it's a hotel. It's a place where people would go out of their homes and stay. Anyways, no, it's been... I believe it's called Airbnb now. Yeah, I think that's true, actually. Yeah, so it's been a wild week from that perspective. And, for someone like me who's so used to being in their office or in their home office, to just, remember all the cool things we've all set up to be Zoom aficionados, to do it just on laptops with the earbuds now, I think is where the world's coming back to, which I'm excited about. I think everybody's looking for that change.
I don't know. I'm afraid to lose the term Zoom aficionado. I feel like that's where...
Yeah, trademark pending. Yeah, no, I think there's something to that, right? Yeah.
But let's talk a little bit, John, about where this industry we both work in is going. And what I'm talking about is this idea that as we get closer and closer to the reopening of the world, if you will, at this point, we've been discussing this idea of there's been a surge in entrepreneurship. And to do that, you are an entrepreneur. You actually were the co-founder for Thread. And you've been in the industry forever, but you still went out and you got some help in doing that. And that was, for me at least, it often starts with getting the right type of people to initiate the process. So how do you find your early on advisors? How do you sort of get to that point?
Sure. Yeah. So I think we start out with just making sure that people understand that starting a company and being an entrepreneur is really hard. I actually just taught a class at Duke, and which is where I spent some of my time as well. And the whole class was 10 reasons why you shouldn't be an entrepreneur. And not because I think a lot of people think there's this glorious abound around it, but it's really hard work. And it takes dedication. You got to be very clear and very focused on the mission of what you can do. And one of those things which you mentioned, is how do you pick the right people that are your advisors, right? How do you pick the right people that you want to associate with? How do you pick the right people that are those first companies you go partner with? And what I would say is it always starts with the mission and vision of the company, right? If you know exactly what you're going to do and you know the order in which you want to do it, then your sights should be set on aligning with people that really understand and get that mission and are willing to have healthy expectations and take risks with you, right? That taking risks with you becomes important. The second thing, though, is when you're looking for these advisors, you're always looking for individuals who have been there and done that. right? People that you know, that you trust, that will frankly tell you not what you want to hear, they'll tell you what you need to hear. And I would say, even for people, I know a lot of entrepreneur friends like mine have really well experienced, built companies, built business units before. So we still need to hear, hey, that's a bad idea. We still need to wrestle with people on things. So that ability to wrestle with people is important. And then the third thing you need is sometimes you just need people to help you unlock doors that you can't unlock yourself. No door, pun intended. Because the reality is in the business we're in life sciences, it's a complex business. Anybody starting a business in life sciences, starting a business in technology, knows that anything you're doing in healthcare takes a long time to mature. And it's really hard to make those first sales and revenue in this space. So longevity and persistence really matter. And so having people on your side that you pull into the company, pull in as advisors, pull in scientific advisories, they really help you because you have to maintain a very clear focus to really deliver on those goals and then move to the next set of goals. So I really think a lot about finding these people as levers you pull. You pull the first lever to get to this phase and you go, okay, now we need to mature next this lever. Then you mature this lever. And sometimes that's the company, sometimes that's just people that you need to connect with that need to help you.
So here's the question. When you're creating this board of advisors, the goal is, like you said, they're often accelerating you down that process.
Yeah, that's right.
And when you're creating that acceleration, how do you land up in a scenario where you have to have that difficult conversation with a board member going, I really appreciate you getting me to this point, but I think that we're past this point now and we need someone to advise us on this next phase. Do you find board members often asking to be part of the next phase so that they get that experience as well, or how does that work out?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't really have that same specific experience. In my experience, it's been that you have board members, you have advisors, you have people that sort of take you at one point in your development. And like in Thread's case, we went from a company that was angel investing started, then we moved on to where we were private equity backed by Water Street Healthcare Partners and JLL Partners, and so we had a board and a group that started here, and then we changed that over time, and that's just because of where the company went, because of the next investment series of growth. And I think what you find in those is that as long as everybody does well in those transitions, as long as everybody's taken care of and understands the part that they play in those growth trajectories, I think everybody really understands, where they start and where they finish. And I think, all in all, what you're looking for, especially as you move to the next tiers, is that those people that originally helped you get where you need to get are still people that speak into your life, right? There's still people that help your company, still people that speak positively and want to help moving forward. So even people that we worked with in the past that we don't work with today are people we still talk to and still give guidance and still text and say, hey, saw this and great job. And so I think it's all about, the ability to mature your organization, but keeping in mind that people are people and you want everybody on board that's got your back to be on board. And I think that's something that has longevity to it. It may just look different in different cycles.
Which raises that next question. And I'm going back to the four topics you raised. You said that in general, board members should do four things for you. They should help you take risks. They should ideally be people who've, quote unquote, been there, done that. They will help you wrestle with the difficult questions, and they will ideally help you open some doors. To that point, how do you deal with, when you're wrestling with questions and you're dealing with incredibly smart people who've often been there and done that, how do you avoid getting defensive?
Yeah, you just do. The one thing you have, and maybe not everybody has to learn, John Reites has to learn this, is that for as much as I've done and know, I have a lot of learning to do, right? I still am learning. There's still new things I need to do. There's still things that I did one way 5 years ago, and the world changed in the last 5 years. Like in opening offices in Europe and Asia Pac, right? I did that in my past and loved it. And applying those principles to today, it's a completely different market. We're having different discussions about offices and closures and masks and things that it doesn't matter how much expertise you've had in doing that before. We're in a new world today. And so I think from my perspective, it's about making sure that there is this, that there's a humble nature of listening to what you need to listen to and figure out what you need to do, because people aren't giving that advice. When you're first principle, you align with people who have your back, there's align with mission and vision. the people that you work with, they're not giving you that constructive feedback because they don't like you. They're giving it to you because they think it's something that takes you to the next level. And I think from my perspective as a CEO and as someone who, when you build and think about companies, your job is to make sure that the company does the right thing in the right order with the right people. In none of those three statements did I say the CEO is to be any of those three things, right? It's my job to mature and guide and get the company where it needs to go, whether I'm in the front pulling it or whether I'm in the back pushing it. And sometimes you have people that come in and say, hey, you really need to be thinking about this. And it happens. And you have to go, that's a good idea. Let's test that out. And sometimes too, taking those inputs and testing it out by talking to customers, talking to other people to say, hey, we're going to go vet this. No, I'm not going to vet it. I'm going to have somebody else vet it who's sort of subjective, so to speak, or going to do that with some, with some relative data capture is a good way to balance. But I think for the most part, especially in our world, there's so much to be done. It's a matter of priority, and it's a matter of listening, and it's a matter of not getting offensive, just understanding that what we're in right now is an amazing opportunity, and we have to continue to grow because we're doing this for participants, we're doing this for people. Right? We're in an industry that puts investigational products in people's bodies. This is not a simple thing to do. And so these complex things we do require us to make complex decisions, which require a lot of input. Last thing I'd say is one of the best advice I ever got is in the counsel of many is wisdom. And so what I would tell you too is a lot of times you might have somebody that's really going, hey, you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to do this. When you start hearing that from 2 or 3 or 4 people you trust, maybe it's not said the same way, but similar enough, you start to hear, hey, maybe you should be listening. There's something here that's a movement. So I would tell you too that I think, especially for these founders and startups that you're talking about, having that group of advisors, also having a group of friends that are CEOs and other co-founders that you can call and I can text and go, hey, what did you guys do when you had this? Becomes really important because that counsel of many really does, at least in my opinion, really helps me to think with the right direction.
So let's flip that question around. We spoke about a situation where maybe you have some learning to do. How do you distinguish between this specific advisor's opinion? I get it. I understand it probably worked in that situation versus, you know what? I think I'm right in this one. I mean, I hear what you're saying, but I feel like I'm still right. Do you sort of wait for 4 other board members told me, so they break the tie? Or do you go, no, I trust my gut? Or, I have to respect this person because I asked them to be one of my advisors and now I defer to them? How do you sort of balance those many emotions, if you will?
Sure. I think you can apply this not just to board, but advisors. You can apply this to your company, individuals. I think it's the same way, right? The world we live in today is about influencing. And I'm not talking about John Reites doing TikTok dances. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about influencing people so that when you pick your battles, and so if you say, I hear you, let's go do this, but this one, I got to tell you, I think we're doing the right thing here. That you can come in with an influential model, say, here's why. Because I think a lot of people say, no, my answer's right. And you say, why? And they go, I don't really know. Well, that's a bad answer. I think influencing is about having again, many in counsel, but it's also about having a trajectory in data and something that evidence to back up why it's right. Yeah. Whether that's a surrogate, like somebody has done it that way before and won or lost, right? Or something else that's happening in the market, whatever that would be. So from my perspective, it always comes back to influencing. I think that way. And in most companies, there's always somebody who has, in a written form, gets to make the final decision. That's the great thing about businesses, right? Which is different than when you make decisions with your family, right? Where you kind of think you know who makes the final decision, but you might not. In a business, it's written down, it's a contract. And so at the end of the day, if somebody needs to say no, there is an ultimate decision maker somewhere for that decision that gets to make it. And sometimes decisions get made in companies that everybody doesn't like, but everybody has to get around them and move them forward. And I think that's the real key. And that's really, a successful business is not around everybody being, yes, totally aligned. Actually, in our business, the ability to be candor, the ability to come in and say, I don't actually like this is encouraged as part of our cultural mantra. But when people bring those up, one of the other pieces is once you figure out what the solution is, everybody becomes part of the solution, not part of the problem. So you have to move that forward. And so what I would say is that's the more important step, is getting to that point and then getting everybody to go, okay, got it. I may not In the back of my mind, this may not be what I thought was the choice, but I'm going to get behind it and move it forward because the group is going to say this is what we got.
Okay. You mentioned a very important issue that's been popping up a little bit, this idea of quote unquote influencing. And when you and I were talking prior to going live, there was a discussion about it in that I believe you guys recently tied hands with a patient advocacy group. Is that accurate?
Yeah, we do work with a few advocacy groups. We did a release with KureClick, and they help set up influencer communities for advocacy groups. That's right.
So could you talk a little bit about that partnership? What is it that you hope to get out of that relationship? And what do you think are the advantages that you guys both bring to the table, if you will?
Sure. Yeah. So KureClick is somebody we've known, we've worked with for a few years, and we formalized the partnership because we built some new things together, which I think are really interesting. So when you think about their business model, not to talk on their behalf, but their business model is about building and helping influencer communities around therapeutic areas and conditions. So essentially setting up this ability to give the tools that are needed for these smaller, they're not nonprofits, they're individuals who are trying to help other people that have their same condition. And they're trying to bring those together because maybe they're in rare diseases or other disease areas where there's not the kind of communities or nonprofits that are needed for that group of people. And so a lot of these influencers are personally investing their own time, right? They're the people that are spending because they want to help people that are in the same state of life that they are. They want to help give support. They want to give information, education, training. And one of the avenues that a lot of influencers, and when we say influencers from a therapeutic or condition specific arena are looking for, is that they look at clinical trials as one of the many things that they do to help educate and provide support and help for participants with certain conditions. And so when you think about these influencer communities, what we've done is KureClick does that really well already. And they use those communities to support the influencers, but also when there's opportunities to participate in clinical trials of all kinds, they can essentially place ads or say, hey, there's this particular trial and you can check here if you're interested, you can learn more here. And so what Thread's done in this partnership is we essentially built a bridge for decentralized studies. So what we're doing is when we're working and partnering with the influencer community, say in a rare disease therapeutic area that's trying to be recruited into a decentralized study with a large pharma, we can come in and build this website, this bridge that gives all the education, all the training, everything they need to know about this particular clinical trial. So they have the utmost transparency, they have the utmost understanding of what's happening. And then if they choose to move forward, they can go right into a decentralized trial with a lot less friction, a lot less steps in between. And so essentially the partnership we have and the way we're holding hands is influencer community, bridge from a technology perspective, and then they go direct into technology that Thread would use to support a decentralized trial.
So that raises several questions. I mean, DCTs being one issue we can definitely get into, but before we get there are a few other topics I want to get into. The first one being this idea of patient advocates who obviously hold sway in those communities because they'll end up being someone that people look out to. When you do that in a post-approval product, you have to deal with the idea of kickbacks. You have to deal with the idea of inappropriate influence, false claims, blah, blah, blah. The FDA is all about using patient advocates right now. That's a big thing that they are definitely pushing for. Several laws sort of supporting that. But how do you, when you're talking to these communities, how do you sort of balance and make sure that you get to the line of helping patients, but not over the line of influencing patients? How has that worked for you?
Yeah. So the thing that clinical trials brings to the table is a very natural regulatory control. So when you're talking about like a commercial research, or you're talking about a commercial healthcare application, a lot of these new rules you're seeing really apply to those. In clinical trials, for anything to be sent to a specific participant to advertise or let them know about a clinical trial, it has to be not just regulatory approved, it has to be IRB and ethics committee approved, right? And each one of the countries, the US aside, each country has its own regulations and requirements for doing things like digital recruitment or social media recruitment. And those can vary greatly depending on if you're in Europe or Asia Pac or Latin America or North America. And so when you look at this model, again, clinical trials has this natural restriction to it because everything that goes to a participant has to go through an institutional review board or ethics committee, and their whole job is they're reviewing everything that's being presented to ensure that it's not giving undue influence, that it's factual, it's clear, and openly. A lot of things we do in clinical trial, one of the barriers we have to digitally recruiting is the requirements for that are so strict that these advertisements are the least slick advertisements you've ever seen, because they're not, where if you and I were going to go out and get an advertisement to buy something else, the advertisement and the language they can use, they can do a lot of things to really influence or sway us in direction. You just can't really do that in clinical trial advertising. And that's not today, that's actually been in place for many years. What we've actually progressed to is actually to this model right now where agencies, reg agencies, sponsors have all said, hey, for us to recruit, we have to get into a more modern effect, which means we have to be doing things more modern, where most people are on social, they're not reading newspapers and TV ads and all the things that have been, frankly, the basis for digital recruitment and clinical trial advertising for years. So this is not a new phenomenon. I think what's happened is that the ability for these tools to be used now, and that everybody's there's more people located. But I would say the regulatory restrictions really do kind of hold us back in what we can get to.
I'm going to challenge you on that, though, because in the sense that IRBs definitely do help guide our ethical thought process, provide a third-party perspective, but IRBs aren't set up to think about what are the legal ramifications and what are the compliance ramifications. They really come in from an ethical / regulatory, here are the criteria you're looking at. And this is a very emerging area, as you know. So I feel like the rules here are, at best, outlines. So I get your argument where it's like, oh yeah, we have to deal with IRBs who are looking out, which is definitely helpful. But is there a analysis that you do internally that goes, you know what, this is in the best interest of patients or subjects. This is not we're trying to push something. And how do you? Of course.
Yeah, let me kind of add a couple of caveats to it. We're just talking about just the regulatory piece. There are a ton of other barriers in the way that we didn't even mention. So a couple of things. One is individuals that are successful in digitally recruiting in clinical trials know that space. They know the complexity of the space, and they know that there are actually a lot of guidelines out there and a lot of best practices to recruit for clinical trials. That means you have to write things at a 7th grade reading level. Right? There's some very practical things that you're not even in business in this space unless you know how to do those things. So I take those totally for granted in your question. So duly noted, because I just go, well, of course, this is what we do. But you're right, most people don't know that exists. I'd say the third piece that's really critical here, and I make this assumption and I shouldn't have, is when you're working with pharma and biotech sponsors, right, who are companies that for a living develop and distribute, new IP, new drugs and products, their medical, legal, and regulatory groups are significant. So IRB and EC, regulatory, a recruitment company know what to do, and then going through an MLR review, medical, legal, regulatory. By the time you get through 18 reviewers who are all thinking about, is this in the best interest for a participant? Is this true and factual? Is this the minimum that I want to say to let them make an educated step? And then beyond that, remember, most clinical trials, even decentralized studies, it still only gets a participant to this level where they meet with a clinician or somebody who says, okay, let's talk about this and see how it applies to you. So there's a ton of what I would tell you are really good benchmarks along the way that make sure that this is done appropriately. I would actually tell you it's the opposite. Because we have all those things in place, we actually can't do some of the things that actually work better in consumer, because of the levels of strength that are in these steps really hold back what you can do. And I think in some ways that's great. And we want controls, again, what we're doing. But in some ways it's really restrictive, meaning you can only do these types of ads. You can only use these type of language. When you say investigational product, you have to tell people what that is. And a lot of people know exactly what it is. And so I think just keep in mind that it's pretty complex and there's a lot of barriers. And I think our industry is just trying to get more progressive with the effort. And that's really where we're at and where this piece of cure code comes into place.
Which really raises that question, and I'm sort of going to flip sides, if you will. You talk about how clinical trials are different in that there's so many barriers that prevent really connecting with patients the way we'd actually want to, so that patients can be best helped, if you will, or subjects can be best helped. First of all, do you prefer the term subject or do you prefer the term patient?
We use the term participant in our company.
What, just so that people are aware, why participant over subject or patient?
Sure. So listen, somebody who's been in a clinical trial, I was a clinical trial participant. I'm actually a clinical trial dropout, and that's a different story. But my wife, my son have all been part of clinical trials. When we were in clinical trials, regardless of the regulatory definition, we are people, we're participants in the study. And when you think about individuals, right, and in our mission to be more inclusive, we're all people and different backgrounds, different whatever that would be. And so when you think about that, it's important for us to use that terminology because I think sometimes some individuals see subject or patient and have a very negative connotation to it. And when we use that word, it's not as inclusive as we want to be in our mission and as our organization. So we've specifically used the word participant. We're not opposed to subject or patient. We just use that term as best we can because we think that's the best classification.
Fair enough. So let's talk about clinical trial participants. In the context of clinical trial participants, do you think that these barriers prevent them from trusting the industry? Is that one of the reasons why the industry is not as trusted as it could be?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't think that that's the case. I think the lack of education is what fuels a lot of that. So for instance, and let me give you a couple anecdotes here. I've been doing this work for almost 20 years. And if you were to call my mom on this podcast, which I would highly recommend, it'd be hilarious, but we won't do it. If you were to call my mom and say, what does John do?
Yeah.
She would say, and she just figured this out, I think, recent years when I showed it to her, she would say, John does tech stuff that helps you to meet with your doctor in their home, and she would give you a telehealth example. Now, that's like one of 55 things we do to decentralize and change studies. But the reality is what we do in this space is complicated. And so, from my perspective, the education around this is what a clinical trial is, this is what it's trying to perform, this is how actually new drugs and new devices get into the market to begin with. There's a big lack of education there. Yeah. And so I would say it's not because people aren't trying. It's because it's such a huge thing that needs to be educated. It's really hard to make that broad base. And so, one of the things that from our perspective, when we think about educating up front, you're trying to make sure that you educate people, participants up front, before they even think about getting selected to do a clinical trial, right? You're getting them to look as they're thinking about it, right? You're thinking about all these components along the way. And I think from my perspective, it really does come down to education, and that there's a lack of education there. The biggest joke I had was I remember doing ad hoc, a market research panel. It's been a couple of years ago. And we asked some of the participants, these potential patients in this room, when you hear clinical trial, what do you think? And the kind of definitions we got were fascinating. And the one that stuck out to me the most was they started describing it, and it was almost like they were describing a CSI episode on TV. And I was like, and I said, and so were the people all laying down in beds together? And they're like, yes. And it was, most people I think of phase 1 clinics and think that's what a clinical trial looks like. And so that's not a slam on clinical trials. It's nothing we've done wrong. It just means that when we're coming to the market, just like I've done, we have to make sure we don't make the wrong assumptions, and we give a lot of context in educating people, knowing that some people are very leery of it, and some people have no idea what a clinical trial is and why it's any different than going to their doctor.
So let's ask the question that comes out of this: has COVID helped in education around clinical trials?
So personally, I think it has. And the reason is because the amount of family, friends, people we have that are not in the industry who come and said, oh my gosh, I just kind of figured out this is the stuff you're doing, right? And now I see how, COVID drugs came to market and look how fast they were. And because they were so prolific, and because you turned on the news every morning and it was about where's this Pfizer drug going, where's this Moderna drug going, right? Those kind of knowledge did do a lot of education. And so I think that can only help. Right? People will make their own decisions about who they trust and don't trust based on the information that they think that they found. And that's just life. But I think in this perspective, it only helped. I'm also glad that we got to a solution in the market that we're all taking advantage of so we can get back to places like this, right? So that actually shows, a positive message that the whole reason we're doing all this work, and a lot of the people like in Thread and in pharma and all sponsors, we're not doing this work every day because we can't do something else. We're doing it because we're really passionate about, we know that us and our children and our children's children are going to need better medicines and better medical products, right? And so we're in this because that's what we're trying to contribute to the world. That's our contribution. And so I think, too, a lot of times when individuals who are thinking about clinical trials see the people on the other side, especially these nurses and PIs, and who could do a lot, they're smart people, they can do anything they want, and they see that they're investing in that, I think it makes people have a very positive relationship come out. The last point I'd make is when we do these patients' feedback surveys, like when you actually get feedback back from patients about participating in clinical trials, participating in decentralized clinical trials, the results are 90+% satisfaction, even when the study is tough to be a part of. And here's why. Because the perception coming in has the opportunity to change over time. And so I think a lot of people, come into this market, like we talked about before, and they have this perception of what it looks like. And when again, they go, oh, this is great. I'm actually getting care while I'm doing in this clinical trial. I'm actually getting more information about my therapy here than I've ever had before. So I think there's a lot of value to it that we have to continue to do a better job of educating people.
Yeah. So we're almost out of time, but I'm going to ask you a couple of questions to keep us finishing up. Based on our discussion, what is one question you'd like the audience to answer for us in the comments?
Great question. I would like for them to know what is the barrier for them to participate in clinical trial as an individual.
I love that. Okay. What is the barrier for our listeners to participate in clinical trials? I'll answer the question for me. I don't like admitting this, but I feel bad about it. But one of the things I always struggle with is if it works, give it to me. As the drug itself, as the approved drug. So if it's a phase 4, if you will. If it's unapproved, let me wait and see what happens. I think that when I have options that are already proven safe and efficacious, why take the chance? But I don't know if that's, I think that that's not the ideal attitude. And I think I need to work on it for myself, but that's my answer. Do you have barrier? Why were you a dropout? Maybe that's a different version of that.
Yeah, well, I was dropout because the study, I couldn't participate in it because it wasn't conducive to my lifestyle. I actually couldn't get out of work, and I couldn't physically give data to them. And that's part of the reason I went out to go do what I'm doing today. Is it was and my wife saw it and my son saw it. But what I will tell you, here's the thing. I had a child involved in some research. And then I actually helped, not knowing it was blind, I helped develop a particular pediatric product. My son ended up taking it later on. And so what I would tell you is even in my son's case, which was a respiratory type of thing, much not as complicated as a lot of indications, but making that decision for us, with him to participate with a consent and assent, him getting involved, I think is important. Right? It's an important decision. This is a way that we contribute, and everybody can contribute as they feel like they can. But the reality is there are patients, there are participants every day in clinical trials doing the work to get new products to market. So it does work.
100%. So let's ask a couple of questions, the rapid fire. What is an accomplishment you're most proud of?
Gotta be Fred. I've invested, I've spent the last, 4+ years of my life in Thread, and I'm just so proud of the team and the product and the hard work we're doing and our ability to admit that we're not perfect and that we're learning and optimizing too. It's just all of that I'm extremely proud of because I can be away and it works and it moves and it goes, right? Because the team is awesome and they're working really hard and they've got the right focus and the right mentality to take care of people. And so I think that from my perspective, I'm really proud of that and I'm really glad that it's working.
When are you most inspired?
When am I most inspired?
Hotel rooms.
Probably. Yeah, obviously hotel rooms. Yeah. No, I think for me, I'm an early riser. So I'm up and running. And I think my 6 to 7 a.m. slot, where I spend some time to listen to some things, to read a few things. There's like some podcasts, some readings, and I skip through and kind of get my highlights of things. And that kind of gets me juiced because that's really where I need to go to make sure I'm not thinking so insular, I'm thinking bigger. And so for me, that kind of inspiration, I have to refuel myself every morning, to really think that way. But I have a time to do that, and that's probably my best time too.
Very cool. What's the best compliment you've ever received?
Somebody told me I got carded on vacation, and so maybe that's the best compliment I had.
That's pretty good.
That I got carded, and I literally was like, "That's hilarious." And they're like, "No, I'm really going to see your ID." And I was like, "Okay, gosh, I'll give you all my IDs. It's great." So that's it.
Okay. Who is your hero or heroine, and why?
That's a great question. I have a lot of heroes and heroines. I'm gonna give special kudos to my mom. My mom is just an amazing person. Homeschooled us. A family of 6. I'm the oldest of 6. Just sacrificed, did all the work. At the home, my dad did awesome, but he had to work too. And so I think just when you see the people who sacrifice and put into just because they want you to do what you want to do when you grow up, right? So I forever grateful for her. And along the way, I have a son who has I have a brother. My youngest brother has a disability, and she's taking care of him and given him lots of opportunity, and just is awesome. And just kind of giving up that way of herself to really invest in all her kids. And so today, like all of us, especially now that we can start to get vaccinated and get back together, are thrilled to do it. But no, she gets my parent award for today for sure.
Well, to be fair, she finally knows that you work in telehealth, so that's pretty good.
That was one of my life goals. It only took me 18 years to get there, but I did.
What is your favorite way to give back to your community?
There are a number of things that we do that we don't talk publicly about to give back, because the reality is people on our team have the best ideas about how to give back. And so we put time, we put people in our company, we give money. We also have done some pretty cool things with taking the talents we have in the organization. So there's a specific group that doesn't need to be named because we want to help them, and it's not about us, it's about them. And we had some of our designers and other people come and help them with their website and some other things they needed because we had the talent to do it. And so I think a lot of times people think financially, but a lot of times it's about, our headspace and us getting into some governance committees and things that others may say detract from the business, but it's our way to give back and help. And so we do spend time doing that, and we're very focused about it. And it does have to align with the mission and vision. And when it does, there's a lot of things we do. We wish we could do more, but we're doing as much as we can. But I would say it's about contributing a lot of different things you can bring to the table, not just money or getting on an event.
How do you define success?
I choose not to define success. The way that I do it is I actually think about what's the legacy you want to live. Like when you're on your deathbed, what's the thing that you want to look back and go, I'm proud of that, right? Because this stuff all does end at some point. And so from my perspective, success, everybody's going to say you're successful, you're not successful, who cares, right? Success to me is about, did I do the things that I want to do, and do I feel like the legacy is in place? So for me, it's a much bigger thing. I just don't focus on success day to day because everybody's opinion is different, and my opinion doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter, right? I think what we're trying to do is to move the needle forward based on what I think is the thing I want to move.
So that really raises the next question, which is, what's your definition of legacy? What is your legacy that you want to leave behind?
Sure. I mean, simply put, I want to leave the world better than when I dropped into it. And so from my perspective, it's for me, it's a pretty easy priority order. It starts with my family, right? You take care of your immediate. And so I want to make sure that my kids do better than me. I want to make sure our kids are, loved and supported and do that. I want to make sure my wife has that. And then I move to my outer family. And then I move to, when I think about Thread and the company, I want all the employees we have to go on and continue to grow and have successful careers. I want their all those components. For me, the legacy is about helping to set that up. It's not about John. It's about helping to set those things up so that we are having other people do what they want to do. Because at the end of the day, happiness is a really hard term to define. Joy, you just know it when you see it. And so I'm just trying to do my part as best I can, and I'm not perfect at it, but as best as I can, to make sure I leave a legacy where other people really were fruitful from.
What is the best vacation you've had recently?
Recently? That's a tough one. It was funny. We did we did this North Carolina Zoo socially distanced. So if you've ever done a zoo socially distanced, it's actually awesome. Like, because you know how you're like all the people cram in to see like the elephant, and you have like little green spaces, and then you sit on your green space and you're like, and you can see everything. That was pretty cool. Actually, my kids had a really good time. And it was, outdoor. It kind of followed all the rules naturally, and apparently no one else had figured it out because it wasn't that busy. So, that was pretty fun.
If you were a superhero, what would your powers be?
Oh my goodness. If I answer this wrong, my 13-year-old's gonna be really depressed. I think if I had to go with it, I feel my son jokes that, like, because I'm a tech guy, I'm a nerd. I like to build things. He and I like to build things, right? Like, we still are adults who buy Legos because we like building things. So I would definitely say I'm an Iron Man guy. Like, I would build tech suits and things like that with these sort of, morphous suits and things that would actually do some things. Because from my perspective, I'm not a superhero. I like to techify and make the tech become something that makes somebody better than they are. So I'd probably say I'm more the Iron Man type. And then hopefully will be excited about that answer.
I thought you'd start with Cyborg, but okay, I'll take Iron Man.
Hey, all right, DC Marvel. I mean, that's a different podcast debate, right?
Totally different. I definitely want to do that podcast, anyways. Last question, since we're in the superhero genre, what is your kryptonite?
Oh, my kryptonite is it is unmeasured thinking. Yeah, and let me say what I mean by that.
Okay.
When people come in and start throwing out a bunch of hype, and this is, it's $1 billion that and $3 billion this, and throw out these aggressively big, like overly huge thinking, and then there's no steps to get there. There's not a measured place to take evolutionary steps. That's my kryptonite. I love big ideas. When people come to me with big ideas or big thoughts and don't have the steps that get you there, it's totally my kryptonite. I'm out. Like, I start to fold and I'm no good to you.
Fair enough. So let me do a quick summary. During this conversation, we landed up talking about board meetings. We talked about how you actually land up finding your advisors, at least early on. We talked about how you actually, when you're early on, find your early set of advisors, everything from taking risks and finding people who've been there, done that, people who can help you wrestle tough questions, people who can open the doors. We talked a little bit about your new partnership with CureClicks and the engagement with influencers, patient advocates, and sort of drawing that balance and drawing that line. And we landed up talking very briefly about the idea of decentralized clinical trials, but we actually hope to get into that the next time around. So I'd love to have you on again to actually talk a little bit more about that. But did I miss anything?
No, Trent, got it. Thanks for being awesome, having a great podcast, bringing me on. I really appreciate it. I love the different questions so you and I can just talk about life and how this stuff works. And I'm interested to see the answer to that question too around barriers to clinical trial participation, because this is another research project that you're doing here that we can learn from, and we'll take it.
Well, I'm going to be putting it on LinkedIn and on Twitter, so feel free to market it, and we'll hopefully have some answers for you. Just to be clear, nothing in this podcast should be construed as legal or clinical advice of any kind. It is intended for educational and entertainment purposes only. For those of you who missed it, where can they reach you, John?
Yeah, John at threadresearch.com, or they can find me on LinkedIn, John Reites. I'm pretty easy to spot.
Perfect. And if you like this podcast, please leave a comment, please subscribe. You can find me at DarshanTalks on Twitter, or go to our website at DarshanTalks.com. Thanks again. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Darshan. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
This is the DarshanTalks podcast. Regulatory guy, irregular podcast with host Darshan Kulkarni. You can find the show on Twitter at DarshanTalks or the show's website at DarshanTalks.com.